Arrogance, at first glance, can be captivating. It draws attention, creates the illusion of confidence, and gives the impression of authority. For a narcissistic individual, it is not merely a personality trait, but a carefully constructed mask designed to impress, intimidate, or manipulate those around them. This mask allows them to move through social spaces with apparent ease, commanding rooms and garnering admiration, often because people mistake their bluster for competence. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, there is a profound fragility. Arrogance functions as a short-lived veneer that conceals insecurity, fear, and a deep need for validation. It is inherently unsustainable because it relies entirely on the perceptions and reactions of others. The mask works only as long as the audience continues to believe in it, and the moment cracks appear, the illusion begins to crumble. The life of a narcissist is often a balancing act between the image they present and the reality they feel. Arrogance, in this sense, is less about genuine superiority and more about a protective mechanism. When someone projects an air of superiority, it often reflects an inner attempt to shield themselves from vulnerability. By appearing untouchable or above critique, the narcissist avoids confronting their own insecurities and fears of inadequacy. The mask of arrogance creates a barrier between the inner self and the world, allowing them to navigate relationships and social hierarchies with a sense of temporary control. However, because it is constructed on external validation rather than internal grounding, it is inherently unstable. Any situation that challenges their self-perception or exposes gaps in their knowledge or empathy threatens to puncture the mask. Arrogance is also performative. It thrives on attention, recognition, and the responses it provokes in others. When people defer, admire, or even fear a narcissist's confidence, the mask seems justified. This creates a cycle in which the narcissist's behavior is continually reinforced by external affirmation. Yet the moment that affirmation falters, when criticism is met with resistance, or when others see through the illusion, the mask begins to lose its power. Arrogance, unlike authentic confidence, cannot endure scrutiny or genuine intimacy. Its fragility becomes evident when relationships deteriorate, trust erodes, or failures occur that cannot be deflected with charm or bluster. What once seemed like invincibility becomes vulnerability, revealing the underlying instability that the mask was meant to conceal. The consequences of relying on arrogance as a mask are profound. While it may provide short-term advantages, dominance in conversation, influence in decision-making, or the illusion of control, over time it isolates. Relationships built on fear, admiration, or manipulation cannot sustain deep connection. Friends, colleagues, and partners may initially respond to the confidence projected, but as the mask slips, disappointment and resentment grow. The short-lived power of arrogance inevitably gives way to long-term vulnerability, as the narcissist discovers that their image cannot substitute for genuine emotional intelligence, empathy, or humility. The mask, once a tool for survival, becomes a barrier to authentic engagement and growth. Arrogance as a short-lived mask also reveals something fundamental about human perception. Others can often sense the discrepancy between appearance and reality, even when they cannot articulate it. Subtle cues, hesitation, inconsistency, or overcompensation signal that the projected superiority is not entirely genuine. Over time, these cracks accumulate, creating a pattern of exposure that erodes credibility. People are generally attuned to authenticity at a subconscious level, and no amount of performance can fully conceal the lack of depth beneath the surface. The mask may command attention temporarily, but it cannot sustain respect indefinitely. Eventually, the truth of vulnerability, imperfection, and human complexity emerges, and the arrogance that once dazzled others is seen as an act, a fragile facade that was never grounded in reality. Finally, the concept of arrogance as a temporary mask carries an essential lesson about human growth and self-awareness. It underscores the idea that attempts to construct identity through external validation are ultimately limiting. True confidence, resilience, and influence arise not from appearances, but from self-understanding and the courage to confront one's own imperfections. The narcissist's mask of arrogance is an attempt to avoid this difficult work, but the very nature of life, its unpredictability, its demands for empathy and cooperation, forces the eventual confrontation with reality. The mask cannot survive perpetual challenge. The more it is needed to maintain a sense of superiority, the more fragile it becomes. In this way, the short-lived nature of arrogance serves as both a warning and an invitation. A warning that superficiality cannot replace authenticity, and an invitation to embrace vulnerability as a path to genuine strength. In essence, arrogance as a mask is a brilliant yet brittle construct. It offers immediate visibility and influence, but it is always temporary, reliant on deception, and vulnerable to exposure. It conceals the true self while simultaneously revealing the deep need for recognition and the fragility of identity built on appearances. The mask may impress, intimidate, and persuade for a time, but it ultimately fails to provide the enduring security, connection, and respect that come from authenticity. Its temporary nature reminds us that real power and resilience do not arise from dominance or bluster, but from the courage to see oneself clearly, embrace imperfections, and engage with the world honestly. Truth has a quiet but unstoppable power, one that does not announce itself with fanfare, but gradually reveals itself through observation, reflection, and consequence. For the narcissist, this force is both invisible and inescapable. While arrogance and charm may create the illusion of control, the truth operates independently of perception or performance. It does not bend to ego, nor does it care for appearances. This is why even the most carefully constructed facade, built from manipulation, deceit, or exaggerated self-importance, eventually begins to crack. The truth's strength lies precisely in its simplicity. It does not need to dominate, only to exist consistently, patiently, and unyieldingly until the discrepancy between illusion and reality becomes undeniable. For the narcissist, the challenge of truth is profound because their reality is often self-contained. They live in a world framed by their own desires, perceptions, and judgments, where the reactions of others serve primarily to validate their self-image. In this enclosed reality, truth can feel like a threat, a disruptive force that undermines identity and power. Yet, it is exactly this disruption that ensures the narcissist's eventual exposure. Whether in subtle social interactions, professional settings, or intimate relationships, the misalignment between projected superiority and genuine competence or empathy becomes increasingly apparent. People notice inconsistencies, small moments when behavior fails to match the projected image. These moments accumulate like drops of water on stone, slowly eroding the carefully built facade. The process of truth revealing itself is rarely sudden or dramatic. It is often incremental, almost imperceptible at first, which makes it all the more insidious for the narcissist. A misjudged comment, a poorly concealed insecurity, a failure to recognize someone else's contribution, these small fissures begin to show. Others may sense them intuitively even before they are consciously aware. Over time, these subtle signals create a growing awareness that the person who once seemed so self-assured and invincible is, in reality, fallible, flawed, and vulnerable. The narcissist may attempt to repair the image through denial, deflection, or increased performance, but the force of truth is patient and indifferent. It is not swayed by excuses, charm, or intimidation. It only requires consistency and observation to assert itself. The revealing power of truth also functions in a social dimension. Human beings are naturally attuned to authenticity, even on a subconscious level. We respond not just to words or actions, but to their alignment, to the congruence between what is projected and what is real. When the narcissist's behavior diverges from this alignment, the discrepancy triggers recognition, whether expressed as doubt, frustration, or distance. Trust erodes, relationships weaken, and influence diminishes. Truth is therefore a social force as well as an existential one. It reshapes perceptions, redirects loyalties, and reconfigures power dynamics. In this way, even the most charismatic narcissist, whose presence once commanded admiration or fear, finds that influence is ultimately limited when it is built on illusion rather than reality. Another dimension of truth's power lies in its ability to operate independently of intention. Unlike human judgment, which can be manipulated, or reputation, which can be carefully managed, truth exists as an objective standard. The narcissist cannot negotiate with it, bribe it, or argue it away. If they are incompetent, unkind, or manipulative, these qualities will manifest in consequences sooner or later. Failures in work, conflicts in relationships, and the inability to genuinely connect with others will all surface as undeniable evidence of the reality beneath the performance. The truth, in this sense, acts as a leveling force. It is impartial, consistent, and inevitable, ensuring that no mask, no matter how elaborate, can permanently obscure reality. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of truth is its inevitability. Life, with all its complexity, unpredictability, and relational depth, cannot be fully controlled by one individual, no matter how assertive or persuasive. Situations arise that expose weakness, errors, or limitations. People express reactions that cannot be scripted. Unforeseen events challenge assumptions and reveal the consequences of choices. The narcissist who relies on control and dominance finds that these realities cannot be contained within the self-constructed narrative. Here, truth exerts its quiet but relentless pressure, revealing the disparity between appearance and substance. Arrogance falters, defensiveness rises, and the facade of invulnerability begins to crumble under its own weight. Yet the power of truth is not simply punitive. It carries within it the possibility of awareness, learning, and transformation. For those willing to confront it, truth provides insight into self-deception, the limits of performance, and the effects of arrogance on others. While narcissists often resist this confrontation, those who engage with reality openly have the chance to recognize the harm caused by illusions, to see the gaps between perception and reality, and to begin authentic change. The same force that exposes pretense can also illuminate a path toward integrity, empathy, and genuine connection, but only if the individual chooses to acknowledge it rather than resist it. In essence, the power of truth lies in its patience, impartiality, and inevitability. It does not act as an immediate adversary, but operates steadily, silently, and pervasively, ensuring that illusions cannot endure indefinitely. For the narcissist, this means that the grandeur projected through arrogance is ultimately fragile, for it stands in contrast to an unyielding reality that will, sooner or later, assert itself. Truth exposes the gaps between performance and authenticity, between ego and reality, and between intention and consequence. It is both a force of revelation and a mirror reflecting the limits of self-constructed identities. In the end, truth does not need to fight, it merely exists, and by doing so, it ensures that every mask, no matter how convincing, will eventually be seen for what it is. Consequences for narcissists rarely arrive as dramatic or theatrical events. They do not always manifest as sudden humiliation or public exposure. More often they occur quietly, almost imperceptibly, like water slowly wearing away stone. These subtle consequences are the natural responses of reality to actions that ignore empathy, collaboration, or honesty. A narcissist may not notice at first, or may even dismiss them as coincidences, but over time, the accumulation of these small effects becomes undeniable. It is in these quiet spaces, in missed opportunities, strained relationships, and lost trust, that arrogance begins to reveal its cost. The irony is profound. The very behaviors that allow a narcissist to assert dominance or superiority in the short term are the behaviors that quietly undermine their life over the long term. The first dimension of these quiet consequences is relational. Human connections are sensitive to authenticity, empathy, and mutual respect. Relationships built on manipulation, self-interest, or constant assertion of superiority are inherently fragile. At first, people may tolerate or even admire the narcissist's confidence and charisma, but repeated exposure to arrogance erodes patience and goodwill. Friends may begin to withdraw, colleagues may resist collaboration, and partners may feel unseen or devalued. These are not explosive events, they are subtle shifts, quiet withdrawals, and unspoken frustrations. The narcissist may interpret them as temporary setbacks or misunderstandings, failing to recognize the cumulative effect of repeated disrespect or self-centered behavior. Over time, however, the distance created by these micro-consequences becomes tangible. The network of support and influence that once bolstered the narcissist's perceived power slowly diminishes, leaving isolation in its wake. Professional life provides another arena where these subtle consequences take shape. A narcissist may initially excel through charm, bold decision-making, or an ability to dominate discussions. Yet the same traits that command attention can alienate co-workers, subordinates, or superiors. Small errors, overlooked feedback, or consistent dismissal of others' ideas eventually reveal flaws that cannot be hidden by charisma alone. Projects fail, trust erodes, and influence wanes, not in a dramatic collapse but through a series of incremental setbacks that collectively reshape reputation. Colleagues may begin to limit collaboration, Opportunities for advancement may slip away, and the narcissist may find themselves increasingly isolated in positions that once seemed secure. These professional consequences are subtle, often invisible to outsiders, but they are no less real or impactful than overt failures. Another aspect of quiet consequences is internal. Narcissists often avoid confronting vulnerability, fear, or uncertainty, yet these emotional truths exert a silent pressure. The constant performance of superiority requires mental and emotional energy. Over time, this sustained effort can lead to stress, anxiety, and a growing sense of disconnection from oneself. The inner life of a narcissist may become fragmented as the persona projected to the world diverges from the reality of internal experience. This dissonance, though not visible externally, produces consequences that are deeply felt: loneliness, dissatisfaction, and the subtle erosion of self-esteem. Paradoxically, the arrogance meant to shield the self from vulnerability becomes the source of its quiet suffering, highlighting the cost of constructing identity on pretense rather than authenticity. Society and community also contribute to these understated consequences. Social norms, cultural expectations, and collective memory exert subtle influence over behavior. A narcissist who disregards collaboration, fairness, or mutual respect will find that opportunities for trust, leadership, and influence diminish over time. People remember patterns of behavior even if individual incidents are minor or forgivable. This collective awareness does not always result in dramatic confrontation, but it reshapes social dynamics, altering who is included, supported, or respected. In this way, the narcissist experiences the quiet but inescapable impact of their actions, reflected in the slow withdrawal of social capital and the decreasing alignment of circumstances with personal ambition. These subtle consequences often carry lessons, whether recognized or not. They force awareness of patterns, behaviors, and their effects on others. Yet narcissists frequently resist acknowledgement, interpreting setbacks as external injustice rather than as responses to their own conduct. The very quietness of these consequences makes them easy to dismiss, delaying insight and perpetuating the cycle of arrogance. Still, reality is relentless in its consistency. Even the smallest misstep, the slightest betrayal of trust, or the unnoticed act of alienation contributes to a growing landscape of consequences that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. The quiet accumulation is relentless, and no amount of charm, deflection, or manipulation can erase the long-term effects. The nature of these consequences also illustrates a deeper truth about life. Real outcomes are often measured not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small, seemingly inconsequential moments. A narcissist may believe that short-term dominance is sufficient to maintain control over relationships, reputation, and success, but the reality of human interaction and social dynamics is far subtler. Trust and respect are fragile and require consistency. Influence is contingent upon perception and reciprocity, and isolation grows not from a single act but from repeated patterns of self-centered behavior. The quiet consequences of arrogance reveal that life is far more measured, patient, and discerning than the ego can comprehend. Ultimately, these subtle consequences serve as both warning and mirror. They quietly expose the limits of arrogance, revealing the fragility of relationships, the instability of reputation, and the inner cost of pretense. They highlight the ways in which reality responds to self-centered behavior, not through dramatic punishment, but through consistent, measured, and inevitable effects. For those who resist reflection, the consequences may remain frustratingly invisible until they coalesce into a profound and undeniable reality. For those willing to engage with them, however, these quiet consequences offer a path toward insight, growth, and the possibility of authentic connection. In the end, arrogance is not sustained by power alone. It is undermined by the subtle, persistent, and inescapable weight of consequence. Self-awareness, in its deepest form, is rarely comfortable, and for a narcissist, it can feel almost threatening. It is a confrontation with truths long avoided, a mirror held up to a carefully curated identity, and a challenge to the assumptions upon which arrogance has been built. Yet this very confrontation is the pivot, the turning point where transformation becomes possible. Self-awareness is not merely recognizing faults or admitting mistakes. It is the courageous acknowledgement of one's patterns, motivations, and impacts on others. It is the realization that the mask of superiority, once relied upon to command respect or influence, may be obscuring rather than enhancing genuine connection and growth. At this moment, the narcissist stands at a crossroads: continue the cycle of pretense and isolation, or engage with reality and embrace authentic change. The process of self-awareness begins subtly. It often emerges through consequences that cannot be ignored, relationships that falter, respect that diminishes, or repeated experiences of failure despite effort. These moments are uncomfortable precisely because they pierce the narrative of invulnerability. The narcissist, accustomed to external validation, must confront the discrepancy between perception and reality. There is a growing awareness that the admiration, fear, or compliance of others does not equal genuine connection or respect. This realization is often accompanied by resistance, denial, or rationalization, yet its presence cannot be completely dismissed. The mind begins to question long-held assumptions, slowly opening the door to introspection. At the heart of this turning point lies the recognition of personal responsibility. Self-awareness requires the narcissist to acknowledge that their actions, choices, and patterns of behavior have real consequences, not abstract or external, but immediate and tangible. This acknowledgement is transformative because it shifts the lens from blame outward toward understanding oneself. The arrogance that once served as armor now appears as a barrier. The manipulations that once secured advantage now reveal themselves as isolating. To see this clearly is to confront vulnerability, which is frightening but also liberating. It is the first step toward breaking free from the cycle of performance and pretense that has defined their identity. Self-awareness also involves the capacity for empathy, which is a critical element of genuine transformation. To truly understand oneself is to recognize how one's behavior affects others, not as a strategic calculation, but as a reflection of shared human experience. This realization can provoke discomfort, guilt, or even shame, but it also opens the possibility for authentic connection. The narcissist begins to perceive relationships not as arenas for validation or control, but as reciprocal engagements requiring respect, listening, and responsiveness. This shift is pivotal. It reframes power and influence from domination to collaboration, from fear to trust, and from illusion to authenticity. In this sense, self-awareness functions as a moral and emotional compass, guiding behavior toward integrity rather than performance. The turning point of self-awareness is also marked by a confrontation with imperfection. Narcissists often construct their identity around the notion of superiority, perfection, or exceptionality. Self-awareness disrupts this illusion by revealing the inherent limits, flaws, and vulnerabilities shared by all human beings. Accepting imperfection is paradoxically empowering because it releases the constant pressure of performance and comparison. It allows for curiosity, growth, and experimentation without the fear of judgment or failure. This acceptance is not resignation. Rather, it is an embrace of reality as it is, rather than as one wishes it to appear. By seeing oneself clearly, with all limitations and possibilities, the narcissist gains access to a new kind of strength, one rooted not in control but in understanding. Importantly, self-awareness is iterative and ongoing. It is not a single moment of insight, but a continual practice of reflection, honesty, and adaptation. The narcissist may confront patterns repeatedly, recognize recurring failures, and encounter resistance from deeply ingrained habits. Yet, each moment of awareness strengthens the capacity to make conscious choices rather than automatic ones. Over time, the self-aware individual learns to navigate relationships, challenges, and ambitions with a grounded sense of purpose, authenticity, and resilience. The mask of arrogance gradually loses its necessity, replaced by a more stable and reliable foundation of genuine competence and empathy. Another critical aspect of self-awareness is its role in liberation. The narcissist, previously trapped in a cycle of performance, validation, and defensiveness, discovers that the turning point offers freedom. By seeing oneself honestly, the compulsions of ego-driven behavior lose their hold. There is relief in recognizing that respect, connection, and influence can be earned through authenticity rather than coercion or deception. This liberation is deeply psychological. It reduces inner tension, fosters clarity of thought, and cultivates the capacity for sustained, meaningful relationships. Self-awareness thus functions as both mirror and key. It reveals the reality of one's life and simultaneously unlocks the possibility for transformation. Finally, the turning point of self-awareness emphasizes the profound responsibility and opportunity inherent in consciousness. To truly see oneself is to engage with the moral, emotional, and relational dimensions of existence. It is to acknowledge that actions matter, that impact is real, and that growth is possible. For the narcissist, this turning point is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it exposes previously hidden flaws and vulnerabilities. Empowering because it opens the door to a life of deeper understanding, connection, and authentic influence. The choice to embrace this insight transforms the trajectory of existence. What once seemed like inevitable isolation and entrapment becomes a path toward genuine engagement, resilience, and fulfillment. In essence, self-awareness as a turning point is the moment when illusion gives way to insight, when performance yields to reflection, and when vulnerability becomes the gateway to authentic power. It is the threshold between continued entrapment in arrogance and the possibility of transformation. Through self-awareness, the narcissist confronts the truth of their behavior, acknowledges the consequences, embraces imperfection, and discovers the profound potential for meaningful connection and personal growth. This turning point, though challenging, is the pivot upon which the future is built, a future no longer dictated by the fragile mask of superiority, but guided by the steady light of understanding, honesty, and authentic presence. True greatness and apparent greatness may look remarkably similar at first glance. Both draw attention, inspire admiration, and create a sense of influence or authority. Yet the underlying principles that distinguish them are fundamentally different. Apparent greatness, or the illusion of superiority, is often built on performance, perception, and manipulation. It is the domain of arrogance, pretense, and carefully curated appearances. True greatness, on the other hand, is grounded in authenticity, integrity, and empathy. It is not dependent on external validation, nor does it require domination or fear to assert influence. This distinction is crucial, for while apparent greatness can impress temporarily, it is fragile and ultimately unsustainable, whereas true greatness endures, inspiring trust, loyalty, and genuine respect. Apparent greatness is seductive precisely because it seems to confer power effortlessly. The narcissist may command attention in a room, dominate conversations, and project an aura of invulnerability. To the untrained eye, this can appear as confidence, competence, or extraordinary capability. People may be drawn to it, not only because of the charisma and boldness displayed, but because society often rewards visibility, performance, and assertiveness. Yet underneath this performance lies an inherent instability. Apparent greatness relies on the reactions of others and the maintenance of an image, which requires constant vigilance, energy, and strategic manipulation. Any lapse, an inconsistency, a failure, or a revealed vulnerability can shatter the illusion. The more one depends on this constructed identity for validation and influence, the more precarious one's position becomes, and the more inevitable the exposure of its limitations. True greatness, by contrast, is subtle and resilient. It does not demand applause, fear, or blind admiration. Instead, it emerges from alignment between values, actions, and character.